I never thought a weekend getaway could unravel into a nightmare that would haunt my every waking moment. Yet here I am, pen in trembling hand, trying to capture the unexplainable terror that befell us deep in the heart of Florida's wild landscapes. I had always been drawn to nature's raw beauty, fascinated by its secrets and eager to capture them through my camera lens. That desire led me, Jade Parker, along with my friends Rob, Serena, and Victor, to the famed Ocala National Forest, a place of enchanting springs, dense woodlands, and a history steeped in mystery. We arrived on a late autumn Friday, our vehicles laden with camping gear, photography equipment, and enough provisions to last us a few days. Rob, ever the practical one, had scouted the area before our trip and was adamant that the forest offered some of the best camping sites in Florida. His experience and level-headed nature lent the group a sense of security, even as Victor's reckless enthusiasm and Serena's delicate sensitivity created a mix of tension and excitement that was palpable from the start. I remember Rob's confident nod as we pulled up to the entrance of the forest, his eyes scanning the dense canopy that loomed ahead like silent sentinels guarding untold secrets. Our destination was a clearing near Alexander Springs, a spot Rob had insisted on due to its scenic beauty and reputed tranquility. We set up our tents under towering cypress trees, their roots snaking over the damp ground like ancient, forgotten fingers. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of blood red and burnt orange, a stark contrast to the ever-present humidity that wrapped itself around us. I couldn't resist taking a few photographs, my camera capturing the interplay of light and shadow, the beauty of nature intermingled with a feeling of foreboding that I couldn't quite place. The first sign that something was awry came shortly after dusk. I had been reviewing my photos near the dying embers of our campfire when I noticed a series of strange footprints near the water's edge, a series of elongated imprints that seemed both human and disturbingly distorted, as if the person had walked on their toes with an unnatural gait. I mentioned it to Rob the next morning, but he dismissed it as a trick of the light and our overactive imaginations after a long day's travel. Victor, ever the thrill-seeker, laughed off my concerns, while Serena's eyes widened with an unspoken fear that I could see all too clearly in her expression. That night, as I lay in my tent listening to the familiar chorus of nocturnal insects, a faint whisper reached my ears. It was so soft I couldn't be sure if it was the wind or something else altogether. The voice was raspy, as if coming from somewhere deep within the forest, repeating words that I could almost make out. My name, a distorted echo that sent shivers down my spine. I strained to listen, heart pounding in my chest, but when I turned on my flashlight and peeked out into the dark, there was nothing there, only the swaying silhouettes of trees and the distant hum of the swamp. The next morning, as the first light broke through the canopy, an unnatural stillness pervaded the forest. The usual chorus of bird song and the rustling of small creatures were conspicuously absent. Serena confided that she'd heard a child's giggle earlier in the night, a sound so pure yet so out of place that it left her trembling. I tried to convince myself that it was merely a trick of the mind, a remnant of nightmares induced by our uneasy sleep. But deep down, I knew that the forest held secrets too ancient and too malevolent to be explained away by mere figments of our imagination. Our unease grew when we ventured into the local town for extra supplies. The small convenience store near the edge of Ocala was as nondescript as any other, yet the clerk's demeanor changed when we mentioned our campsite near Alexander Springs. His eyes darted nervously and he muttered something about a shadowy figure known to roam the forest, a creature that could mimic voices and lure unsuspecting visitors into the depths of the swamp. Rob scoffed at the notion, attributing it to local folklore meant to scare off curious tourists, but Serena's quiet nod and the look of dread in her eyes told me that perhaps not everyone was as dismissive of such tales. That very night, as the wind picked up and the branches tapped against our tent like skeletal fingers, we experienced an attack that would forever scar our memories. I had been documenting the night sky when a sudden rustling erupted from the edge of our campsite. At first we thought it was an animal, a deer or perhaps a stray dog, but then the sound shifted. It became eerily familiar, mimicking Victor's deep, hearty laughter, even though he was right beside us. The realization that something was playing with our perceptions hit us all at once. We fumbled for our flashlights, our hearts thundering in our chests, and stepped outside to confront the source of the sound. In the weak beam of our lights, I caught a glimpse of a figure moving through the underbrush, a gaunt, pale silhouette with elongated limbs that seemed to vanish into the darkness before we could get a clear look. The terror that gripped us in that moment was paralyzing, yet it also ignited a fierce determination to understand what was happening. The next day, driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, Serena and I decided to explore the edges of the swamp. Our footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves and soft earth, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay and dampness. Near a bend in a small winding creek, we saw a figure, a small child standing knee-deep in water, illuminated by a stray beam of sunlight that broke through the gloom. The child's eyes were dark and vacant, yet there was a hint of sorrow in them. We called out softly, expecting a response, but as soon as our voices reached the air, the figure dissolved, leaving nothing but ripples in the water and an overwhelming sense of loss. Haunted by this encounter, we returned to our camp only to find more signs that something was deeply wrong. Equipment began to fail inexplicably. My camera batteries drained in moments, despite being fully charged. Rob's compass spun erratically whenever we moved too close to a particular grove of ancient trees, and even our food, which we had meticulously prepared, developed a foul odor as if tainted by the very essence of decay. That night, sleep eluded us, and each rustle in the dark, every whisper carried by the wind, became a source of terror that kept us awake until the first pale light of dawn. In our desperate attempt to piece together the mysteries of our surroundings, we began to notice strange symbols carved into the bark of some trees, patterns that resembled protective wards or warnings from a bygone era. These carvings, almost imperceptible in the flickering light, hinted at rituals and beliefs held by the indigenous tribes who once called this land home. It was as if the forest itself had been a battleground for ancient forces, its roots and branches bearing witness to conflicts between settlers and the native peoples, and the restless spirits of those who had been wronged lingered still. One evening, as the sky darkened into a deep indigo and the full moon emerged from behind swirling clouds, we decided to make a stand. The oppressive weight of the forest and the constant barrage of unexplained phenomena had pushed us to the brink. Determined to confront the source of our torment, we gathered around a blazing campfire, our makeshift circle of protection trembling in the cold night air. Armed with nothing more than a few hiking knives, a hatchet, and a handful of protective talismans that Serena had fashioned from sage and old worn crosses, we braced ourselves for whatever might come. It was then that the creature revealed itself in a way that left us all paralyzed with fear. Emerging silently from the gloom, it slithered around the perimeter of our circle, its movements fluid and predatory. The entity was humanoid yet disturbingly malformed. Its skin was pallid, almost translucent in the firelight, and its eyes were black voids that reflected our own terror back at us. What made it even more unnerving was its uncanny ability to mimic our voices. At one point, it spoke in my own voice, calling out to Rob as if luring him away from safety. The sound was so precise, so disturbingly intimate, that it shattered any illusion of safety we had left. In that terrifying moment, as I watched Rob struggle to maintain his composure, I felt a grim certainty settle over me. This was no ordinary wild animal or trick of the mind. We were dealing with an ancient force, a spirit of the land, perhaps even a skinwalker or a wraith, born from the dark and violent history of this place. The creature's actions seemed to be a direct manifestation of the anger and sorrow embedded in the very soil of Florida's swamps and forests. Its presence was a macabre reminder of a time when these lands were steeped in bloodshed and injustice, a time when the cries of the oppressed echoed in the winds. The tension reached its breaking point when we discovered a chilling sight near the ruins of an old sugar mill, barely a stone's throw from our campsite. Hidden in the shadows of crumbling walls, we found a small collection of bones, some animal, others disturbingly human. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the sight of the remains served as a grim confirmation that we were not the first to fall victim to whatever malevolence haunted these woods. The ruins, relics of a time when early settlers had established their fragile communities, now stood as silent witnesses to the suffering and violence that had once consumed the land. For that long, stifling night, we stood our ground. The creature continued its silent dance around the campfire, its form flickering in and out of the firelight, as if uncertain whether to remain in our realm or retreat to the shadowed depths. Serena began to recite protective prayers, a recitation she had found etched onto a battered wooden post near the mill ruins, her voice steady despite the palpable fear that clutched at our hearts. Rob and Victor did their best to keep the fire burning bright, knowing that the flames seemed to repel the creature's advances, even if only for a moment. The creature hissed and recoiled whenever it neared the circle of light, its elongated limbs flailing as it attempted to breach our barrier. But as the night dragged on, a desperate realization took root among us. Staying any longer would only invite further torment. The creature's presence was unrelenting, its hunger for fear and chaos insatiable. At the break of dawn, we reached a unanimous decision. Escape was our only hope. In a chaotic flurry, we doused the campfire, packed up our meager belongings, and set off along the winding forest path, our hearts pounding as if each step might be our last. Even Victor, whose earlier bravado had seemed unbreakable, was visibly shaken, his eyes darting nervously behind every rustle in the underbrush. As we hurried away from Alexander Springs in the suffocating grasp of Ocala National Forest, I couldn't shake the image of that creature from my mind. Every time I glanced into the rearview mirror of our hastily commandeered car, I half expected to see those black, empty eyes staring back at me from the edge of the road. The drive was a blur of fear and regret. The landscapes outside our windows transformed into ominous silhouettes rather than the welcoming vistas we had once anticipated. I sat in the back seat, clutching my camera as if it were a lifeline, while Rob navigated the winding roads with a determined, unspoken urgency to put as much distance between us and that cursed place. Weeks have passed since that fateful night, yet the scars remain indelible. I still find myself waking in the middle of the night, heart racing, as though expecting the creature to appear at the foot of my bed. Serena's quiet voice now carries an undercurrent of perpetual anxiety, and even Rob, whose stoic exterior had always been a bastion of strength, seems haunted by nightmares that leave him restless and subdued. The terror we experienced in the depths of Florida has seeped into every corner of our lives, a reminder that some evils cannot be easily escaped, no matter how far one runs. In the aftermath, I attempted to review the photographs I had taken that night, hoping to find some rational explanation for the blurred, shadowy forms that occasionally appeared in the background. Most of the images were tainted by an inexplicable static, as if the camera itself had rebelled against capturing the truth. Only a few pictures taken during the brief moments when our flashlights pierced the oppressive darkness offered fleeting glimpses of something beyond the ordinary, a faint outline of a figure, a distorted reflection in water, or a fleeting shadow that seemed to watch us from the periphery of the frame. Each image was a silent testament to the unspeakable horror we had endured, a reminder that the land we had so eagerly sought to explore was steeped in a legacy of sorrow and malevolence. I've spent countless sleepless nights piecing together the fragments of our experience, trying to understand the entity that stalked us among the cypress trees and murky waters. The clues, though disjointed and shrouded in mystery, pointed to a dark history, a legacy of conflict, injustice, and the restless spirits of those who had been robbed of their peace. The markings carved into the trees, the whispered voices that mimicked our own, and the grotesque remains near the ruined sugar mill all hinted at a past where the land itself had been steeped in suffering. Perhaps the creature was not simply a mindless predator, but a guardian of that history, a twisted embodiment of the pain and loss that still resonated in every shadow of Ocala National Forest. Now, as I write this, I wonder if our desperate flight was truly an escape, or merely a temporary reprieve. The feeling of being followed lingers like a persistent nightmare. I sometimes catch a glimpse of a pale, indistinct shape at the edge of my vision, a silent reminder that the forest's dark legacy is never far behind. The question that haunts me is whether the land itself has a memory, a consciousness forged from centuries of violence and despair, that will continue to reach out to those who dare to disturb its slumber. I have tried to return to the comforts of normal life, but the whispers of that night follow me like a shadow. In moments of quiet, when the wind rustles the leaves outside my window, I swear I can hear voices echoing from a time long past, voices that sound eerily like my own. Sometimes, when the darkness seems especially oppressive, I fear that I have not truly left Ocala behind at all, that its malevolent spirit has latched onto me, waiting for the moment to reclaim what it believes is rightfully its own. There are nights when I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the desperate prayers we recited around that dwindling fire, the frantic rush to pack up our lives in a single, heart-pounding dawn. I recall the look in Rob's eyes, the silent, determined fear of a man who had seen too much too soon, and Serena's trembling resolve as she clutched her protective charms, her voice barely a whisper against the howling of unseen forces. Even Victor, who had once seemed invincible in the face of danger, had been reduced to a haunted shell of the person he used to be. In that moment, we had all come to understand that nature, in its rawest form, held secrets that no human mind was meant to comprehend. As I reflect on everything that transpired, I am left with a profound sense of humility and dread. We had ventured into the heart of a land that bore the scars of ancient sorrow and violent history, only to discover that some parts of the earth are steeped in darkness that cannot be banished by mere light or rational thought. The creature we encountered was a manifestation of that darkness, a spectral force that guarded its territory with a ferocity born of centuries of pain. It was both a warning and a lament, a living relic of the past that had come to life in the flickering shadows of a campfire. I have since tried to warn others about the true nature of Ocala National Forest, urging them to respect the legends and heed the warnings of the locals. Yet, like so many cautionary tales, my words are often met with skepticism, dismissed as the ramblings of a traumatized soul. Perhaps it is better this way. After all, the land itself seems to thrive on the ignorance of its visitors, feeding off the unwitting energy of those who trespass without caution. I now live with the constant reminder that some places are not meant to be disturbed. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind through the branches, carries with it the weight of a history too painful to forget. And though I have left the physical confines of that cursed clearing near Alexander Springs, a part of me remains there, ensnared by the memory of that cold, unyielding terror and the undeniable truth that the land itself is alive with a malevolent spirit. This experience has reshaped me in ways I am only beginning to understand. I no longer see nature as a benign, picturesque backdrop for my photography, but as a living, breathing entity with its own memories and mysteries. I now approach every shadow, every sound, with a cautious respect born of first-hand knowledge of the darkness that lurks just beyond the firelight. And while I still venture out to capture the beauty of the world, I do so with a wary heart, forever mindful of the night when the whispers turned to cries, and the face of nature revealed its most sinister countenance. In the end, I realized that our encounter in Florida was not merely a brush with the supernatural, but a profound reminder of the thin line between beauty and horror, a line that, once crossed, can never be fully erased from one's soul. The creature's legacy, intertwined with the tortured history of Ocala National Forest, serves as an eternal testament to the fact that some evils are not confined to the pages of legend. They live and breathe in the hidden corners of the world, waiting silently for the next unsuspecting wanderer to awaken them. I write these words now not to recount a mere camping trip gone awry, but to offer a cautionary tale, a plea to those who might one day seek the solace of nature's wild embrace. Remember that every land holds its secrets, and some secrets are guarded by forces far more ancient and terrible than we can ever imagine. And as I continue to live with the lingering echoes of that cursed night, I am left with the unsettling knowledge that while I may have fled the physical realm of that haunted forest, its spirit still walks beside me, a silent, relentless reminder of the horrors that lie just beyond the reach of light. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world is hushed and the memories of that night come flooding back, I can still hear the soft rustling of leaves and the distant, sorrowful whispers of a land that refuses to let go of its past. And in those moments, I know that the darkness we encountered in Ocala is not confined to a single place or time. It is an enduring part of our world, a shadow that stretches across the ages, waiting patiently for the next soul brave or foolish enough to cross its path.